Without further ado or delay, let me welcome our first presenter, Mr. Brian Knowlton, who's a family law attorney with much experience from the San Antonio area. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brian Knowlton, and I run the Knowlton Law Firm out of San Antonio, Texas. I want to thank Dr. O'Connor for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm very excited to be here. I have professional experience in this area. I have personal experience in this area also. And I believe I have a story to tell. I didn't mean to be here this morning, and I didn't mean to be a part of this movement. And this wasn't something that I planned to do. This was a place where I found myself. And it's been the hardest thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And I want you to know that there are clear opportunities to make a very difficult situation better for children throughout the state of Texas. The good news for me is last October we finally settled, and I now have nearly 50% of the time with my son. So I like to say my son now has a dad. He's 4 years old. This started for me when he was about 4 months old. And I walked into the divorce court asking for help and protection from what was happening with his mother, and what I found was that I was stripped of many of my parental rights, and that I was stripped of my time with my son. And I'm so grateful that we're past that, but it was a long journey. It was a very long journey. I retained the best family law firm in Travis County that I could possibly find. And it took 3.5 years. We went to court 29 times. She had 7 attorneys. We had 7 professionals involved, 3 of whom were expert witnesses. And litigation stretched amongst multiple counties. And there was nothing wrong with me as a father. I'm a good dad. I'm a good dad, I'm a good brother, I'm a good son, I'm a good person. The only thing that happened is I found myself caught in a system that's broken, and a system that isn't working. And it was very strange. Like I said, I didn't intend to be here this morning, and I didn't intend to be a part of this movement. In fact, I was doing something completely different with my life until I was pulled into this. I was an entertainment executive. I spent the first 15 years of my career as a professional symphony musician. I played and toured with orchestras. I played on video game soundtracks and movie scores. After 15 years of that, I spent the next 15 years of my life as an executive producer with a multi-billion-dollar entertainment corporation. I produced shows. I produced fireworks shows and song and dance shows. I created haunted houses and planned large Christmas light displays. I spent a lot of my time working with Sesame Street productions. I worked with Elmo and Big Bird and Abby and Count. I one time had to fire Big Bird. He had an attendance problem. So that was my life. That's where I was. And along the way in my entertainment career, I picked up a law degree and I passed the bar, and I focused on intellectual property and entertainment law. And it wasn't until I found myself in divorce court that I found that I really needed to focus on family law, and I really needed to understand what was happening because it was affecting me so directly. Something else that I feel like I need to say about myself is, my first 2 degrees were in music performance, but as an undergrad, I nearly minored in feminist studies. I'm a bit of a feminist, which puts me in an odd position sometimes, being up on a podium like this, because, well, I'll tell you about that later, but I think I was 1 class away from a minor, and I found that personally, I've always really aligned myself with equal protections, and that the women in my life have always said that I'm a bit more of a feminist than they are. And that's just kind of my background, and I want you to know that because of some of the things I want to talk about later. So I found myself in this odd position where I walked into divorce court, and the next thing you know, I had a court order that said I could only see my son for 8% of the time. 8% of the time. And I was no longer allowed in our residence, and I was to pick him up, and I could have him for 4 hours, but I had nowhere to go with him because I was in San Antonio and he was here in Austin. And so I would go to Barnes & Noble's. It was a bookstore, it was a safe place. There was a kids section. I would spread out a baby blanket on the floor in the corner, and I brought a little mobile with me that I attached to the bookshelf. And I would bring out my little toys, and I would spend 3 or 4 hours with my little newborn boy there playing goo goo gaga games and everything else. And you know, the staff at Barnes & Noble's, God bless them, walked past me day after day as I did this, and they never said a thing to me. And I think probably as they walked by, they knew that my son and I were in a difficult situation, you know. And they supported me in that. Ultimately, things changed. We fought very hard, and it's gotten a lot better for me at this point, but it was very difficult when I walked into divorce court because I didn't understand how possession and access worked in Texas. I had never had any reason to consider it. They don't teach that in family law in law school, really. They may spend a little bit of time there, but they don't really talk about it. They like to talk about more sexy things that are a little more current with regards to legislation. And they don't really talk about the nuts and bolts of family law. And so as I began to study it, and I began to study the standard possession order, I realized that, oh my gosh, I'm in a really difficult situation because this is not going to allow me to be a father to my son. This is going to mean that I'm going to be a visitor in my son's life, and that's not what my son deserves. So I spent more time studying this and ultimately realized that I needed to fight for something different. And ultimately we were able to find something different in my situation. And along the way, I developed a passion for family law, and now I help families. I've practiced as far as Harris County, up at Tarrant County, Kerr County, Bexar County, Uvalde County. I've kind of practiced all around the state. I love to travel and go to other towns and practice in different courtrooms around towns. And I've seen some really amazing things. And I want to give you a little behind the scenes glimpse at what's happening with the practice of family law. The first thing is there's a lot of great, hardworking people in this industry. Most of the attorneys that I've run into, they roll up their sleeves and they work really hard to try to figure out what's right for their clients and what's right for the kids of their clients. They're very passionate. They don't tend to make an amazing living, but they do okay. And I have found that they're not anti-possession for non-custodial parents. That really, they want the kids to have a good relationship with both parents. Indeed, there was a Bar Association poll that happened late last fall. Now, this is the family law section of the Texas Bar Association. And they put a poll out asking two different areas of questions, one of which was about shared parenting. And when I say shared parenting, what I mean is legislation that provides for custody schedules that are equal, so that both parents have an equal amount of time with their children. And what they asked was whether or not attorneys opposed having laws for equal parenting. And nearly 50% of the attorneys that answered that poll said no, they do not oppose equal shared parenting. Now, this is the industry that is actively involved in litigating custody and making their living off of custody disputes, and still nearly 50% either said I don't have an opinion on it or I don't oppose it, I think it's okay. Something else that was interesting is 86% of these attorneys said that they've advocated for a 50-50 parenting time for a client in the last 5 years, and that of those clients, a substantial number have done so even if the parents lived in different school zones. In fact, 49% said that they had advocated for a 50-50 shared parenting schedule even if parents lived in different school zones. And 38% said that they did so even if it was a high conflict situation and the parents weren't getting along. So I think that, you know, that's a clear indication that the Texas Bar and attorneys practicing understand the common sense reasons behind why when two parents walk into a courtroom that they should know that their children is going to have liberal access to both parents and to both parents' families. It seems common sense to me, and I don't understand arguments why two parents who walk into a courtroom shouldn't be seen as having equal custody of their children. How could that not be in the best of a child, that they have equal access to both parents and have great relationships with both parents? There's also a private Facebook, actually a few private Facebook groups that I'm a part of, and these are Facebook groups that only attorneys are allowed in. They actually check your bar number, and you can only be in this group if you're an attorney, and the moment you get elected to a judge, you get kicked out of the group. So it's only attorneys, and it's about, one of the groups is about 10,000 people strong, and there was recently an article in one of our lawyer journals stating that it was actually one of the largest, most effective Texas bar associations because of the amount of people. And there's a constant dialogue happening in this Facebook group. And every time questions of shared parenting and equal possession come up, I can't help but take notice of that. And I'm always blown away by how in support of shared parenting these various attorneys are in these different private groups. And people speak very candidly in these groups. I think they feel very safe that it's somewhat of a private forum, and still they express these opinions. My experience with the judiciary and with judges, and I spend time practicing in front of judges. I spend time in chambers with judges, having frank conversations about different situations. And my experience is that there's a lot of great judges out there, and that they really care, and that they work really hard. And much like attorneys, they roll up their sleeves and they're trying to figure out the right decision in impossible situations. And some of them lean this way and some of them lean this way, but I've run into a lot of really great people. And what this has told me is, it's not the people as much as it is the system. And when I say the system, I'm saying it's the statutes, and it's the schedule that's in the statutes. And we have an opportunity to change the statutes so that when two parents walk in, a child is guaranteed to have liberal access to both of their parents and to all of their family. And how is that not in the best interest of a child? When we talk about a standard possession order, for those of you that may not be familiar with that, you probably have a friend or a family member that sees their kid every other weekend. Maybe they have a chunk of time for 30 days in the summer. Holidays are usually pretty shared and a little bit 50-50. And when you look at it on its face, sometimes it's kind of makes sense, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because the schedule is all over the place. So I tried to make sense of it a number of years ago. And the best analogy I've come up with to explain why we are where we are with the standard possession order is if I go back to an analogy of, say 1950, and I don't know if you guys remember the Leave It to Beaver episode. For those of you who may not be familiar with Leave It to Beaver, it was, it's a very atomic family. You've got an educated father who's a business person who goes to work 8 to 5 every day downtown. You have a mom who's a homemaker. They live in a very pretty town, and they have two young sons who run into the issues that little young sons ran into and that day. And it's a very good example of, it's kind of that American idea of an atomic family. And I think a standard possession order may somewhat be explained by looking at that family model. And that, imagine that little Beaver's parents needed to separate for whatever reason. And so they separate. What's in the best interest of little Beaver and his older brother? Well, they need to stay in the home. It makes sense that we want some continuity in their life, and they're going to stay in the home. And if they're going to stay in the home, we probably need the person who is the homemaker to stay in the home with them so that things are moving as smoothly as possible. So Dad's going to move out. Dad's going to move out. He's probably going to get an apartment, and it makes sense that he'll get an apartment downtown close to work. So now Dad's out, Mom's in the house. And we want to make sure that Dad gets some time with the kids, but Dad works 8 to 5 and he's not really that available, so let's give him some weekend time, right? We'll give him a weekend, but we can't give him every weekend because weekends are special time, so let's kind of swap weekends with Mom and Dad, okay? So now Dad has every other weekend, and you know what? Maybe what we should do is on a Wednesday night, let's give him 2 hours with the kids to take them to dinner, just so that we kind of fill in the gap a little bit, and bang, you have a standard possession order. It's every other weekend with a little 2-hour dinner date. Texas has expanded on that possession schedule, thankfully. And in Texas, you can get a schedule that begins after school on Thursday and goes to Monday morning. And that is more time. In fact, it's usually about 38% of the time. However, there's still deficiencies in that schedule. Because if you take your child to school on Monday morning, you will see them a little bit in the evening that next Thursday, but then you won't see them again until the following Thursday. So an 11-day period of time goes by where you only see your child a few hours in the evening. still with an expanded standard possession order. And a little bit of evening time throughout the period of 11 days is not enough time for a parent to parent their child. It is not enough time for a parent to parent their child. So I found in my practice that some parents are completely okay with this. You know, I tell them that, hey, this is probably what's going to happen, and mom or dad, and I find that both mom and dad sometimes are put on this visitation schedule. You know, mom and dad will say, oh, okay, they'll do that. But I oftentimes find people who are more involved parents that want that time with their kids and they can't get their kids. And I have clients, both men and women, both mothers and fathers, who are battling this issue because they're not able to be the kind of parent to their child that they want to be. And that child is losing out for that. When we look at making change to legislation with regards to shared parenting and 50-50 possession as opposed to a standard possession order, there are a number of tried and true shared parenting schedules. We can do a week on or a week off. We can do 5 days with one parent, which is a school week, and then 2 days with the other, 2 days with the others, and we call it a 5-2-2. We can also do a 5-2-2 wrap. There's a number of different shared parenting schedules that are tried and true, and they work. And there has certainly been discussion about the workability of these schedules with relation to school, when children go to school. Both parents need to be in somewhat proximity, because if you're going to be a parent, you're going to have your kid 50% of the time. That means you need to be able to get them to school at a reasonable time. And you need to work your work situation around that also. And currently, there are provisions for the court to look away from the standard possession order if work schedules or geographic problems come into play, and that would be no different if we move to a shared 50-50 schedule. So I've run into two different organizations that have opposed shared parenting, and one of them is the Texas Family Law Foundation, who of course is very involved in what's happening in committee meetings, and is very vocal on different legislative efforts. And the second one is actually feminist movements. I found that women organizations are fairly opposed to shared parenting, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about both of those. First of all, with regards to the Texas Family Law Foundation, I'm not a member. I have not had one-on-one conversations with them, and I do not know their lobbyists. What I have are examples of the types of worksheets that they will pass out to legislators that make arguments against shared parenting and 50-50 possession schedules. And honestly, I think that probably a lot of legislators probably only have that amount of contact with them also. And so I would like to address that. They distributed a two-page worksheet in 2017 opposing shared parenting, and they made a couple of points that I think are worth unraveling a little bit. And the first one was, they say that the current standard possession order already allows for parents, non-possessory parents, to have nearly 50% with their children and sometimes greater than 50%, and allege that by changing it to 50%, in those years when a parent might have greater than 50%, it might actually reduce their possession. However, they're very careful with their language when they write about this, because they speak in terms of days. They speak in terms of, this is how many days a year a parent will get. And, you know, honestly, a 2-hour period of time is not a day with your child. You know, if you're picking up your child and you're going home, doing homework, having dinner, and putting that, or if you're taking them on a quick dinner date, that is not a day with your child. My son wakes up at about 6 a.m. in the morning, and he comes in and he typically body slams me or headbutts me awake. Sometimes we get in a tickle match. I'll get him out of bed, and I'll go in the kitchen and I'll fix him breakfast. He loves French toast and pancakes, and I've got a sausage that we make, and that's what we'll do. And we'll spend about an hour and a half, and I'll get him breakfast, and maybe he'll watch some cartoons. And then after that, we go out and play in the neighborhood. He's got a he for many years, he's 4, but for the last 2 years he's had one of those little motorized Jeeps. And we drive it around the neighborhood, the neighbors wave to him, they all know him. In the summertime, he'll actually drive the Jeep to the neighborhood pool, get out and we'll go swimming in the morning, and then he drives the little Jeep back and he parks it in the parking lot. It's very cute. Now he's got a police motorcycle with a police helmet, and so we drive around the neighborhood. And after playing in the morning, he goes nap time for a good hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours. And after that, there's a number of things we do. His cousins are in town. They live only a few minutes away from me in San Antonio, so we'll go play with them. He started baseball when he was 3. He's also very good at horseback riding. He's had almost 20 lessons now, and he can get up on a horse and ride that horse. So we'll go to horseback riding lessons. After that, we come back home. We'll play. We've got a lot of toys in the house, we'll play. I'll cook dinner, and after dinner we start our nighttime routine. And our nighttime routine is we read books for about half an hour, and after that I put him in bed, we say our prayers, and after we say our prayers I help him go to sleep at night. That is a day of parenting. Picking my son up and taking him to Barnes & Noble's for 2 hours and setting up in a corner with a mobile as people are walking by is not parenting. So when the Texas Family Law Foundation in their materials say that a parent has nearly 50% of the days, unravel that and look at that, because the truth is the Texas Family Code does not divide possession in periods of days. In fact, it speaks of hours. It says that exchange times are going to happen at 5 o'clock, sometimes at noon. Sometimes they happen after school, sometimes they happen when school starts. And those are all different variations of days that are divided by hours, not days. So to say that the current schedule already allows for 50-50, oftentimes allows for 50-50 possession is absolutely inaccurate. And for anybody who's interested, please contact me. I would be happy to email you a calendar calculator that my law firm has put together that very clearly shows here in Austin, the Austin Independent School District, the last 3 years of that school schedule and the percentage of time that a child would have a parent. And it's more like 37, 38%. That's what we're talking about. But it also creates that schedule where a parent will go 11 days with only seeing their child for a little bit of time in the evening. One of the other Texas Family Law Foundation arguments that they made was that if a parent has less than the presumption of a standard possession order, that it's because the court has found that parent to be undesirable in one way or another. And my practice has not been consistent with that. There are times when I've seen good parents who have not been given the full custody schedule, and that's not necessarily the case. The language they use in their pamphlets, and I'm sure they'll go around this legislative session, is they call parents who want shared custody, they call them the complainers. Those are the terms that they use. They call them the complainers. And that's difficult for me to listen to, because I want to tell you something. And you may not know this, but here in this room right now, and throughout this day, some of the presenters represent, there are some heroes sitting among you. And I want you to know that. There are people who have lost their kids to this system, who have fought for their kids in this system. There are heroes that, after getting their kids back, or maybe not getting their kids back at all, have worked tirelessly to help support other parents who are going through the kinds of issues that people go through in here. These people, they work on back channels of private Facebook groups, and sometimes some of these organizations, they field hundreds of inquiries from moms and dads every day who are needing emotional support for these kinds of issues. They provide training for suicide awareness, and unfortunately, throughout the year, we find that a lot of people that are helped in these social media groups, actually, we have a number of suicides throughout the year, and it's awful. It's absolutely awful. I want you to imagine, and perhaps you've seen this, or perhaps you've had this experience yourself, a mom at a grocery store. Say she's at H-E-B, and she's shopping, and she's distracted, and she looks around, and she doesn't know where her child is. And maybe, where's my child? Where's my kid? And maybe she or he can't find their child for a few minutes. And imagine the panic that parent has. Now they're running around the store trying to find their child, and maybe they find the child, maybe they don't. But, at that moment, that parent is, I mean, it's very traumatic, you know. They go, they're in their fight or flight system, you know. They're responding based on their amygdala, and they are in this fight or flight response. And when a parent walks into a family court and their rights to see their child are so easily stripped away from them, how is that not different from that parent who loses their child in a grocery store? It is not that much different. And I can tell you from personal experience, standing in front of a judge, listening to him regulate my time with my son, that is the emotional response that a lot of parents have in these situations. One of the other arguments that the Texas Family Law Foundation has made in these pamphlets that they've distributed is that the current law already provides a treatment for children under 3, whereas 50-50 would blow that away, and that's not good for children under 3. And the truth is that there was, and this is old law, but there's common law. It's called the tender years doctrine, and the idea is that a child in their first 3 years of development need to have a primary attachment to a parent, presumably mom, and that for the first 3 years that this child needs to have that primary attachment. Now that law is overturned, but the Texas Family Code actually gives judges very broad discretion in determining what a possession schedule is for an infant all the way to age 3. The only direction they give is that the possession schedule needs to increase towards a standard possession order by the time that child turns 3. This was used against me in court, and we had to get experts involved. And there was a lot of conversation about attachment theory, and I'll let other professionals throughout the day maybe talk about that a little bit more. But this is what I can tell you that I know about that is attachment theory, and that is this theory that a child needs to have one primary attachment. It rose from Romanian orphanages. And an orphan in Romania is a very different child than a Texas child with 2 fit, loving parents. And the scientist that ultimately began talking about attachment theory when he passed away was already agreeing with subsequent theories about multi-attachments, that children can have multiple attachments with multiple people. And how is that not in the best interest of a child? It's common sense. We have 2 parents, you have 2 adults that love you, you have 2 functional, loving parents. And how is it not common sense that a child should have access to both of those parents? So when we talk about shared parenting, what we're talking about is we're talking about creating a situation where even a young child can have liberal access to both of their parents. There's always the conversation of child support, and I'm not going to go very deeply into child support. I feel like it can sometimes be a bit of a distraction. But the argument always is that complaining parents just want 50-50 possession because presumably if you have 50-50 possession, neither child should have to pay child support. Well, first, that's not always the case. Secondly, I'm going to let other people talk about the Title IV agencies and child support and everything else. What I can tell you is I think it's a distraction. I think it's a distraction, and I think that kids need equal time with both of their parents. They say that in the Texas Family Law Foundation, in the materials that they distribute, they say that the current law doesn't reduce but encourages, that the current law reduces litigation and that going to shared parenting would increase litigation. And this is my experience here, both personal and professionally, is when you have 2 parties and one is completely disenfranchised and disempowered and one has been over-empowered, there's going to be conflict. And the only way to resolve conflict is to try to empower both parties. And we do this in mediation all the time. We do everything we can to try to flush out a scenario for both parents so that both parents feel empowered enough to make a decision to settle on a custody case. And so I don't understand how creating a super parent and a visiting parent under the current standard possession order regime somehow is going to be less litigious than having 2 parents show up and have equal access to their kids right off the bat. When you have 2 people who are equally empowered, Both of those people have skin in the game, and both of those people have a reason to settle the case and to not litigate. The other organization that I found tends to oppose shared parenting, and this is always a little awkward for me to talk about, they're feminist organizations. They're women organizations, and I don't believe that's happened in Texas as much, but the very first time I saw it happen was a few years ago. It was in Florida, and Florida had a shared parenting bill that made it all to the governor's office, and it was Governor Rick Scott, and he ultimately vetoed it, aligning himself with the National Organization of Women, who he's a very conservative governor, and that was a very odd political alignment there. He actually received 11,000 emails and phone calls up to the point where he vetoed the bill, and 80% of those were in favor, and it had been voted on and passed with overwhelming results, as has happened in some other states in the country. Others, we'll talk about that later. And so it's interesting for me. And again, you know, I've taken numerous feminist classes in undergrad. I took equal protections, and I in law school, and I personally have aligned myself with a lot of feminist principles. And I have to say that I think that women organizations and feminist organizations that oppose equal parenting, I think they need to open the hood and they need to relook at what's happening here. Because what's happening here is a child is not having equal access to both parents because one parent is discriminated against. And that is because an overwhelming amount of parents who are put on a standard possession order are men. And I think that if we look at this, that really this is a feminist issue in terms of we need both parents to have equal protections. We need both parents to be able to walk into the courtroom and know that they're going to have equal time with their kids regardless of their gender. So that's ultimately putting the child's needs above the needs of the parents. And I know it can be very difficult. And it's made me consider, with regards to civil rights, over the last few decades, the needle has been moved, and the needle needs to move further. We're not done with that fight yet. However, I think that this is a lingering pink elephant in the living room, because here is one situation where women organizations have had a difficult time giving up an area where they are empowered. And they typically ask over-empowered groups to give up their power in the interest of equality. And I would suggest that women organizations might look towards how we can better normalize and equalize power in this specific way. At the end of the day, there are a couple of principles that I think are just worth saying out loud, and then I'm going to close. And that shared parenting and the movement towards shared parenting is about a child's right to have liberal access to both parents. It's about a child possessing this right regardless of the sex or economic position of the other parent. It will reduce conflict and litigation because both parents will have equal power when they enter the courtroom. And it's based on the common sense proposition that a child needs both parents. My son woke up at 3 a.m. with 103.5 degree fever last night. So I'm a little out of it. I was kind of up. And you know, I gave him some Motrin. It took me about an hour and a half to get the fever down, and I had some lukewarm wash rags, and I'm sponging his face and I'm holding his hand. He's crying. He's not feeling really well. And I can tell you it's a privilege to be able to wake up in the middle of the night and care for my sick child. It's an absolute privilege. He has this joke. He all the time likes to bring up the fact, or the time that he threw up on me multiple times. He had a stomach bug one time, and he did. I don't know, if for those of you that are parents in here, they projectile, and it comes out of nowhere. And we're sitting down on the couch, and the next thing you know, I'm covered in throw up. before I knew it, it happened a second time, and then I taught him to go to the toilet. We used it. We learned from it. By the end of the 5, he was making it, but he still makes fun of me and the fact that he threw up on me numerous times. And you know, it's a privilege. It's a privilege. I was robbed of my opportunity to wake up in the middle of the night and bottle feed my son during his first year. I was robbed of that opportunity. 7 professionals, and they all said I was a wonderful father and a good guy. They were all very concerned about what was happening with me. And because of what happened in our particular area of litigation, it took us a good while. There were 7 attorneys involved on the other side over a period of 3.5 years. We went to court 29 times. And at the end of the day, it was just a fight so my kid could have a dad. That's all it was. And thank God we succeeded in that fight last October. But there are parents all across the state of Texas that are fighting this fight. And in all sincerity, they don't have the means and wherewithal that I did, you know? Thank God I had a law degree. And thank God I was licensed, and thank God I had the ability to network and make the connections so that I could find the support I had. I should not have had to have done that, though, and there are many parents out there who do not have the ability to take care of their child like I did. And so I'll close just by asking that everybody really consider carefully the common sense proposition that a child should have equal access to both of their parents. And why shouldn't that be in legislation? And once it's legislated, I think it's going to be really easy. It's going to be really easy. And everybody's going to feel empowered, and judges will not be in a difficult situation in terms of making decisions, because we'll start out with a presumption of equal parenting. That's all I have. Thank you so much for giving me the time this morning. Do we have a question?
Mr. Knowlton,
Yes.
let me ask you, among non-custodial parents who engage the litigation system, in your experience, on average, or just most common scenario, do you find a similar scenario where the parents will continue litigation, there will be several attorneys longitudinally engaged, and the expense that they endure along the line, and the professionals involved in the parent system?
It's certainly not uncommon for a litigant to spend $30,000 to $100,000 to $150,000 on litigation trying to be a parent. It's certainly not uncommon for one parent, once over-empowered and they're creating a super parent, to not be reasonable and not be willing to flex in terms of creating a possession schedule that's sensible, that ensures that the child get access to both people. And at the end of the day, I think it prolongs litigation, because it gives us a reason to fight.
Have you also had, in your experience, parents post, so to speak, 50-50 or shared parenting, in which you see differences of litigation rates, or you see children that appear or not appear to be more satisfactory in their situation?
I don't see them much afterwards, and so I think that probably answers the question.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Any other questions? Yes, sir?
Yes, Counselor Knowlton, you mentioned a poll undertaken by the Texas Bar.
Yes.
Is it possible to get a copy of that, either, you being the conduit of that? I'd like to see that in further depth.
Absolutely. I have, I'll make sure you have my email,
Okay.
and I can email it to you.
And the second thing, the last thing I had was, can you reiterate, please, I think you had a statement there relative to the Family Law Foundation and their portrayal of 50% shared parenting, or the custody time frame. There's only 24 hours in a day, but can you reiterate the statement that you made, whether that's accurate or not, by the Family Law Foundation?
I do not believe it's accurate, and I have calculators that I would also be willing to share with you. If you look at it in terms of hours, and you say that, hey, a day starts at 5 o'clock in the evening, or possession time starts at 5 o'clock in the evening, then you come up with a different percentage of time than you do if you just assume that if a parent sees that child 2 hours that day, that they have a day. And that's the difference. When you calculate it by day, you get a different result than if you calculate it by the hour. And honestly, it's difficult. It took us a long time to figure out how to come up with a real common sense Excel formula that would show what the actual percentage is, in this instance in the Austin Independent School District, what the actual percentage is when you calculate it by the hour. And the Texas Family Code does not talk in terms of days, it talks in terms of hours. Exchange times happen at school, you know, when school begins or school ends, or at 5 o'clock or at 8 in the morning sometime, you know, at one time in the year it starts at noon. But exchanges don't happen at midnight so that we can calculate by the day. It happens in the middle of the day. Does that clarify that?
We're in agreement, thank you.
Great, absolutely. And again, I'm happy to give my email, and I'm happy to forward those materials to anybody in the room. Yes, sir.
Yes, you mentioned two Facebook groups. What are those groups?
There are a few of them. Here, let me pull them up. And you can actually, and there's a great article about it. It's actually a really great organization. You know, when Harvey hit Houston, one of these groups, the one that has 10,000 members, a lot of attorneys started sharing information on how we could help different litigants that were going to be dealing with FEMA or whatever. It's a really neat group. So let me pull up the two family law groups. They're by no means secret, they're just private groups. My phone's not working down here. I would be happy to share that with you. I'll make sure you have my email address.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Clifton, do you believe that there should be a transition time from a stay-at-home parent, especially in the case of an infant? So let's say, you know, one parent's working full-time, the other parent's a stay-at-home parent. Should there be some sort of transition time before the kid's just basically put into daycare for the working parent's time?
I think that makes common sense, yes.
Okay.
I think that when you have a parent that, you know, has been spending the majority of the time, to the extent that the other parent can make themselves available and that it's actual parenting time and not, hey, I get time, but I'm just throwing the kid in daycare. You know, I think that it makes sense. What we're looking to do here is we're trying to create an opportunity where kids have access to their parents.
Right. So you would also value the former stay-at-home parent keeping the child versus putting the child just in daycare because it's the other parent's time?
I think parenting time is more valuable than daycare time, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You described the Edith to Beaver type analogy as to part of the reasoning why maybe current statutes are the way they are. How would you describe today's current family?
And I forgot to sum up that point. Thank you for bringing it up again. And I would close with saying, how many people in this room know families that fit that atomic model? You know what I mean? Where dad's working downtown and mom is the stay-at-home mom, and absolutely that is the case. But we all know that there has been so much change to the family structure over the last 50 years that there needs to be a change to custody schedules that reflect the change of family structures. Thank you for asking that. Yes, sir.
So with the question that one lady asked, that seems to me like you're asking the right of first refusal. Is that where that question is going, perhaps? And
let me explain what a right of first refusal is. It's frequently a clause that we'll put in a final possession schedule that says if a parent can't have possession of the child, say for a period of time of 4 hours, that they will first give the other parent the opportunity to spend that time with their child before they give them to a daycare or a babysitter or whatever, which I've found to be effective. It can be. The practical effect of that is difficult, though, because the only way to enforce that is with a motion to enforce. You have to go to court, you have to tell a judge that, listen, this parent isn't doing that, and the judge has to enforce it, and you have to prove what happened, and it can be difficult, but at the very least, putting the language in the order sometimes can really help out a lot, so that parents, again, make the common sense decision. If I can't be with my kid, of course, I'm going to give my kid the opportunity to be with the other parent first. Makes sense. Does that answer your question? Great. Anything else? Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this morning. I appreciate it.